John 15, 9 through 17. As the Father hath loved me, so have I loved you. Continue ye in my love. If ye keep my commandments, ye shall abide in my love, even as I have kept my Father's commandments, and abide in his love. These things I have spoken unto you, that my joy might remain in you, and that your joy might be full. This is my commandment, that ye love one another, as I have loved you. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Ye are my friends, if ye do whatsoever I command you. Henceforth I call you not servants, for the servant knoweth not what his Lord doeth. But I have called you friends. For all things that I have heard of my Father, I have made known unto you. Ye have not chosen me, but I have chosen you, and ordained you, that you should go and bring forth fruit, and that your fruit should remain, that whatsoever ye shall ask of the Father in my name, he may give it to you. These things I command you, that you love one another.
All right, so we are jumping back into the farewell discourse. And as we are in the Lent season preparing for Easter, for me, it was a no-brainer as far as selecting this passage because Jesus is talking with his disciples in the upper room, are going to the garden, and these are his final instructions that he's going to give to them. And so for me, my interest peaks because as Jesus is preparing for himself to die on the cross, to resurrect, and to change the course of human history, his final words to disciples matter. They carry great weight. These are the things that Jesus wants to press upon them for the coming days, coming weeks, the months and years that are going to follow his death and resurrection. And so what he says matters greatly here. And so I want you to see how Jesus starts to bring up obedience. And it's through the course of love. It's a hard transition, and it'll make sense in a minute. Have you ever wondered why army ants are able to follow one another perfectly spaced out to get to the food that that we all just love so much? They don't sit there and look up. They're not using eyesight to be able to follow that trail. What they're doing is they're following pheromones. And the ant that goes before the other ant, it leaves a trail of pheromones that the ants behind them follow and then leave more pheromones. And then it just creates a line for the ants to follow. What's interesting, though, is that ants can form what's called an ant mill, which is when the lead ant is going, and for some reason, for whatever reason, whether it's an obstacle or if food gets changed, it will start to turn back inwards. And by the time that the ant is getting to the kind of circling back around, the end ant is coming. And so what happens is that the lead ant begins to follow the wrong pheromones, and it follows the last ant. And it forms a circle. This is called an antmill. It's like a whirlpool of ants. And they just keep circling one another, circling one another, and circling one another until eventually one ant, for whatever reason, breaks free and then the antmill stops. And in 1921, a man by the name of William Beebe discovered an antmill that was 1,200 feet wide. Thousands of ants. This is maybe some of y'all's fear. Thousands of ants. 1,200 feet wide. He recorded that it took the outside ant for the perimeter ant 2 hours to get around the whole circle of ants. Eventually it would break off, but it would take over a day for them to recognize it and for the antmill to end. He recorded that thousands of ants had died in that process. And the reason I bring it up is because as we are called to follow Christ, there's a lot of times where we can get into a deadly cycle. The ants that have good intentions and good reasons of just trying to support their colony and do what they need to do get caught into a deadly ant mill. And in the same way, when we focus on the wrong things, we can get caught into a deadly cycle of following Christ, but doing it for the wrong reasons. What begins to happen is that the joy that we experience from Christ, the love, the foundation, the strength that keeps us moving forward, if we follow Jesus for the wrong reasons, begins to be sucked out very quickly. And for me, as we begin to talk about obedience, and Jesus has, remember, the farewell discourse goes 13. He kind of sets the precedent with some things that he does on washing their feet, but he starts to teach in 14. And so Jesus, as he's teaching them, he begins to focus on obedience. But he doesn't just begin to talk about obedience. He doesn't open up his message to them with obedience. And even when he introduces obedience to them, it is not simply to obey for obedience' sake. But for some way, somehow, as we follow Jesus longer and longer, how easy does it get for us to focus only on obedience? That as I follow Jesus, the mark of a mature believer is obedience. What I would set before you is that if we think that obedience, going to church or acting a certain way is the hallmark, the pinnacle of obedience, of maturity, then we've set ourselves up into a deadly cycle. So to get you thinking, let me ask you a simple question with a simple answer. What is your primary purpose? What is the weight that the scales of life are going to be weighed against? At the end of your life, when you look back, what is it that you're going to be able to look back and say, my life was fulfilled? It had purpose and meaning, and I am happy and okay with my life. The Westminster Confession says that the chief purpose of man is to glorify God, which I think we can get behind pretty easy. The one that we struggle with is that second part, which is, and to enjoy him forever. As Jesus begins to introduce to us obedience, it is that second part that he begins to introduce it through. So let me read it for you one more time. John 15, verses 9 to 17. And you'll notice in the bulletin, before I go in, that we're actually supposed to be reading verses 1 to 17. If your memory's really good, then you'll remember that Jesus is talking about the vine and the branches. When I came for my trial sermon, that's exactly what I preached, because it's my favorite passage on what it means to follow Jesus. So I don't want to focus on the imagery that he's given. I want us to focus in on how Jesus follows up the picture that he gives. So verse 9 says, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I have learned from the Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you, so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last. And so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command, to love each other. So what Jesus does in this passage is he's oscillating between two things. And you've probably already picked up the first one, which is really the second thing he brings up, which is obedience. To love other people. That is the weight that he says. The last thing, that my main call to obedience, is how you treat the people around you. And so that's the one thing that he oscillates. But he starts off, and what he goes back to constantly is look at how he introduces it in verse 9. As my Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. So what Jesus does is he's introducing and calling you to obey him, is he introduces it with saying, I love you. Remain in my love. And so obedience is not what the weight of following Jesus is about. What marks a mature believer is God's presence in your life. It is you pursuing him and remaining in his love. In verses 9, which I've just read, and verse 11, and verse 13, and verses 15 to 16, which I'm going to read because I believe it carries weight. Verse 11, I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. Verse 13, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. 15 and 16, I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I have learned from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last, so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. Jesus comes in and he reorients what it means for you to follow him. And obedience is not the first thing that he draws you to. What he starts with is his love for you. Obedience is always, always, always the result of whatever you love. You will obey whatever you're pursuing. And so if you love Jesus, then the command to follow him, to make disciples, to love the people around you, well, that's going to come a lot more natural because of the equation, because of what comes first. Your love for Christ is always going to determine how much you obey him. And he's not just going to call you to obedience for obedience sake. Obedience is a result of his love for you and your love for him. And so Jesus, think about this, when he comes in and you're reading the stories of the Gospels, Jesus' biggest problem is not with the everyday man. His biggest problem is with the pastors of the day. The people who should have been able to obey God, who made obedience the key thing, that created laws around laws around laws. And Jesus' problem is with them because they've focused too much on obedience. For them, obedience becomes the first thing, and then the relationship with God comes after. And Jesus is saying it is your relationship with God that comes first and your love for him. Then comes obedience. And so the hallmark, the sign of maturity is not necessarily your obedience to Christ. It is God's presence in your life. It is your love for him that should mark and make a mature believer. So let me ask you a question. You don't have to answer. I don't want y'all to necessarily respond. But how many computers do you think are in the world today? It's over 2 billion. There's over 4.5 billion computing systems. How many smartphones do you think are in the world today? There's 8 billion people. There's 7.5 billion smartphones in the world. My question for you is, if God cares so much about your obedience, then why would he not create you like a computer? Because at any point I can pull out my phone, I can click into any app. If I want to look at photos, I click on the app, I tell the phone what to do, and what does it pull up? It pulls up my pictures. If I want to go into Facebook, I click on the Facebook app, and it pulls up Facebook. And then I waste so much time. If I want to really prove my math teacher wrong, and I don't know the math problem in front of me, what do? I pull out the calculator that's in my pocket that she said I would never have, and I do whatever math problem it is. And every time my phone works and responds the way I need it to. A computer is perfect at completing the commands you give it. It is perfect in obedience. And yet, my question for you is, if God, his key thing for you was obedience, then why would he give you the ability to choose to follow him or not? Why would he give you free will? If obedience was the ultimate thing that God desired from you, then why would he ever create Adam and Eve to have the ability to choose? There is something much deeper and core to us than simple obedience. It is a relationship with God where we are freely choosing him above anything and everything else in our life. Obedience is always tied to what you love. You will obey the thing that you have given your life, which is why I was asking you what your purpose is. Whatever you weigh your life by, whatever consumes your heart, is what you are obedient to. And what Jesus is doing is he's restructuring everything on how we relate to God. And he's saying, hey, this is not something where God's just commanding it. He's not just forcing it to happen. What God is doing is he is loving you, and he wants you to choose him over anything and everything else. Our obedience is always, always tied back to what we love. And that's why I'm pushing back, and I want to present to you that maturity for believers is not simple obedience. Because if I make following Jesus about what I do or don't do, it is the quickest way for me to lose peace, joy, love, patience, mercy, grace. All of those things get sucked out of my life because I have to be perfect. I have no room for any of that. What becomes my life is I get into a death march. And I start to go in that circle of an antmill and into a deadly cycle where all I care about is what I'm doing or not doing. And instead of listening to the Spirit and instead of responding to the presence of God, instead of loving him more, I care much more about what I'm doing. It's no longer a response to what I love. I've made obedience the king of my heart. And Jesus does not push you, encourage you to obey simply for obedience' sake. And I don't want us as a church to simply do that. If you don't believe me, look at John 15:11. It says, I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete. So what I want you to see is, if you're like circling, you like to write in your Bible, circle my joy. Jesus' joy, that when you read through scriptures and you're like, man, I love what Jesus is about. I love what Jesus is doing. I love how the disciples just come to him and he has all these answers. There's something different about Jesus. When you read his life, it is saying my joy, that joy that I have in my relationship with the Father, I want that to be in you. And what I want you to think of is that he doesn't say your joy. At the very end, he says your joy may be complete, but how he starts it is my joy, which means we cannot manufacture, I cannot produce a meaningful joy. Bruce's joy goes out the window as soon as something bad happens in my life. As soon as a storm hits, Bruce's joy is gone. Bruce gets stressed, and instead of responding in loving and kindness, I respond with everything opposite of that. And so the fruits of the Spirit that Jesus starts to lay that groundwork, the foundation, the rooted of your system, is not simple obedience. It is something that is connected to God. It is his joy that is in your life that changes you. It is his grace, his mercy, his patience. It is those things that you cannot produce in and of yourself. There is something that God has placed within you that you need to be connected to him like a branch connected to the vine. That's why Jesus starts off by giving that illustration. A healthy plant, when it is growing, is not sitting there focused on growing fruit and growing fruit. A healthy plant is more concerned about the nutrients that it's getting, and then the natural byproduct, the natural result is the fruit that grows. What Jesus is setting before you is to respond to his love and to make sure that you're pursuing his presence. And I'm not trying to push down obedience, because obedience is important enough for Jesus to talk about it. In verses 10, verses 12, verses 14, and verses 17, Jesus oscillates between his love for you and your love for him and obedience. Obedience is key. They're tied together. But obedience does not come before his love for you. Jesus does not introduce the conversation with saying, you need to obey me, get your life together, I'm tired of dealing with you guys. What he introduces the conversation is, hey, I love you, remain in my love. And then obedience comes. The beautiful part of what that begins to transform is that if I'm loving other people, it no longer depends on how they act. It doesn't matter how they treat me and how they respond to me, because what I'm responding to is not their love for me. I'm responding to God's love for me. It is God's love that has rooted me and established me and built a foundation. And so I'm going to be who I am. I'm going to love the people around me, not because they deserve it, because Jesus has loved me and changed my life. Obedience is tied not to the things around you. It's not tied to the situations that you find yourself in, the people that you're around. It is directly tied to your relationship with Christ. And so the important thing that we have to start asking ourselves is, how are you spending meaningful time building that relationship with God? If we're going to take Jesus seriously here, the final things that he tells his disciples before he goes and dies and resurrects and the history of humanity is changed is that I love you, remain in my love, and then connected to that is to obey. Then how are you seeking his presence in your life? When I was younger and teenager and kind of starting somewhat to take my relationship more serious with God, what I would do is I would right before bed, I read devotionals. As I got older and started to go to college, didn't have as many responsibilities. I woke up early in the morning, and that's when I spent my time with God. As 3 children came into my life and wrecked any semblance of schedule that I had, my schedule of spending time with God looks a lot different. Sometimes it's waking up early in the morning to spend time with God, but sometimes Charlie likes to wake up at 5 in the morning and beat me to it. And so I don't get to spend my morning time with God each and every day. Sometimes it's at lunchtime. Sometimes it's right before I go to bed. Right now, it's a lot more flexible, and I don't get to be as rigid in saying I just do it in the mornings. And so what I have found is that in the quiet spaces that I have, whether that is in the car, or whether that is right before I walk through the door as I pull up to the house, I try to spend as much time as I can with God. When I'm in the car, I've gotten to where I don't really listen to music, and if that's your thing, that's awesome. That's great for you. I'm just telling you, music is not my thing right now. And so I listen to podcasts. I listen to the Bible Project. I listen to Ask NT Write Anything. I listen to a host of sermons, because I want to make sure that I'm constantly growing. For me to feel close to God is I love to open up his word. That's just me. How I connect with God is that I try to find those times anywhere and everywhere that I can. For you, it might be listening to worship music. It might be just taking a walk out in nature and spending some time in prayer. Each of us is going to be different. The crazy thing for me is that as Jesus is pressing upon us and saying, remain in my love, he doesn't tell you how to do it, right? He just says to remain in his love. And then he goes into obedience. The key thing with a relationship is that every relationship is different. The way you connect to God is going to be looking a little different than the way I connect with God. There's core parts that are essential for everything. But just like how Victoria and I we see each other in the morning, in the evening, we talk throughout the day, it's the same thing with Jesus. Find a way that you connect with him. And if he is the king of your heart, if he is the thing that you are seeking the most, then you're not going to keep letting it slide. For me, recently, my prayer life got real stale. And I was struggling, and I was trying to think through of how can I change this? And then God provided this way through Victoria, where she found an app, which we talked about at our prayer time yesterday. It was called Lectio 365. And for me, Victoria was like, you should really try this. And I was like, you don't know what you're talking about. I don't trust apps, technology. And then she kept pressing upon me, and I eventually tried it. And it's been a thing that's breathed some fresh air into my life. And I only share this because if Jesus is the most important thing, then you will find ways to spend time with him. Just like in any kind of relationship. The things that are important to you, you find and create time, carve out time for you to do. And Jesus is your life, your source of joy. And so my question is, why wouldn't we want to spend time with him? As we wrap up, I'll tell a story, and then I want to read John 15. But I had a student reach out to me, and they were struggling with an addiction that they had. And so we met at Arby's, because they like to use me for food. So We're eating Arby's curly fries, and he kind of perks up because he knows, like, he asked to meet with me, and so I'm going to make him be the one that brings the conversation up. And so he says, hey, Bruce, here's my problem, and we spent some time talking about it and what exactly he's doing, what exactly he's struggling with. And then he sits there, and he's like looking to me to say something. My very first question to him, which he was very much offended by, was, how much do you love Jesus? And as I asked that, he stood, he kind of like pushed back his seat a little bit, and his face is struggling because I know that he loves Jesus if he's asking me to help with this issue. And so he's sitting there, and a look of confusion's come across his face because he's like, what is Bruce looking for? What's the answer I need to give? How do I give tangible results to my love for Jesus? And eventually I kind of put him out of his misery, and I answer for him. And I was like, look, whatever you're struggling with, if you do not love Jesus more than your struggle, you're never going to overcome it. If Jesus is not the number one thing you're pursuing, then you can deal with this addiction. But I promise you, in the coming weeks and months that you win, it will come back up in another way. The pursuit of your heart matters. And if we do not love Jesus more than our struggles, more than the things that we want to keep secret from everybody else, more than us forgiving ourselves, if we don't love Jesus more than those, then we're never going to trust him to actually obey. We're never going to experience God more because you're not putting yourself out in faith anymore. It is your love that is the turning point, the hinge point for your relationship with God and experiencing him. And so before we can even talk about loving other people, we have to talk, do you actually love Jesus? More than obedience, more than just seeing people in your life, more than the things that we enjoy doing, our self-medicating ways. Jesus has to be the main thing, the main goal, the main pursuit. So let me end with John 15, 1-8. So this is the image that he gives that we just talked about. He says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word that I have spoken to you. Remain in me, as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up and thrown into the fire and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. As Jesus introduces this imagery, the thing that he's saying is to remain in me. You are the branch. You are not the source of your own life. You have to be connected to Jesus to do that. You're only going to connect to Jesus if you love him. And when you do, obedience, those moments of great faith start to follow. But it starts with love. What are you pursuing? Let me pray for us, and then we'll have a time of response. Jesus, we fall before you. God, you are just so incredible. We do not deserve your grace, your mercy, your love. And yet, God, you choose to love us. You choose to show grace and mercy. You're not forced to. And so, God, may we be in constant response to that. May we obey you. May we love the people around us. May we forgive ourselves, forgive those that we don't like, be patient with those we find annoying, not because necessarily they deserve it, but because you are a God who has given us everything and have loved us so much. So, Father, may we be in constant response to your love in our life, that we become a people of salt and light. As we go out from here into our lives, God, help us to be a constant lighthouse for you, responding to who you are and being a light to others. I ask these things in your name. Amen.